Welcome back, everybody. Today we're talking about Social Security as the Wall Street Journal just published an article about how young workers fear they will never see a cent from it. And similar to how we talk about the information online sometimes being misleading as it relates to investing, the same is true as it relates to Social Security or personal finance or just money in general. So in this video, we're going to go through the Wall Street Journal's article and any takeaways we can get from it, show how the discussion about Social Security online is mostly flawed, and then talk about what we can and should be doing about it. So let's go ahead and get started. So if we start with this Wall Street Journal article, it's talking about how the younger generation in the U.S. is worried about Social Security and not ultimately being able to see any benefits from it. And to be completely fair, I think it's a reasonable worry to have, at least up to an extent, and we're going to talk about that. But the article talks about the idea of Social Security disappearing is one of the country's longer-running neuroses and shows few signs of abating. Some 47% of U.S. non-retirees believe Social Security won't be able to pay them benefits when they retire, according to a 2023 Gallup survey, a level that has been mostly steady over more than 3 decades of polling. And what's interesting to me about that paragraph is that the polling numbers have stayed steady for about 3 decades. I kind of assumed that it would have been rising over the last decade or so, but it's something we've clearly always been worried about. But then the article talks about something bigger than just Social Security. Workers say their frustrations aren't just about having little faith that the government's going to address a possible funding shortfall. They're also annoyed because they see older people enjoying benefits that they don't expect to receive. And some of the younger workers are increasing their savings rates or subtracting Social Security from their retirement planning completely. Others say they are bitter, frustrated, and uneasy about their long-term future. And quote, "It's like paying a very expensive toll on a bridge that's collapsing before I can cross." And that was from Logue, a 36-year-old property manager in California. Now, Logue thinks his parents and grandparents had it easier financially and sometimes jokes he won't be able to retire until he's 95. He has heard the phrase Social Security in conjunction with insolvent too many times to feel otherwise. So there was a couple interesting points in those paragraphs to me, and that's one, people are planning to not have any Social Security available to them, which in general might not be the worst thing ever, which we'll touch on later. And then two, this idea that current generations believe that their parents and grandparents had it easier than they do and being upset about it. And this is a thing that I see a lot of, especially recently online, and we're going to get back to it in a minute. But the idea that Social Security is going to go bust is one that's been talked about a lot, and the article goes on to say that the government has warned for decades that Social Security's trust funds, if combined, are on track to be depleted as the U.S. population ages. This has often mistakenly been taken to mean the program will go bust, a fundamental misunderstanding that fueled fears of a full-on collapse in Social Security, said Jason Fitchner, chief economist at the Bipartisan Policy Center, a think tank. In fact, the trust funds cover only a portion of benefit payouts. The bulk of the rest is funded by payroll taxes. So the likelihood that current workers will get nothing from Social Security is practically nil. And then it goes on to say, the worst case scenario for a worker currently in their 20s or 30s likely would be receiving about 25% less in benefits than planned. Getting 75% of planned benefits isn't great, but it's also not zero. And Fitchner said some doubts about the program's future stem from the language that political commentators and people on social media use to discuss it. And this, I think, was a major point in the article and something that we talk about quite a bit on this channel, where we live in a time when understanding and learning about things like money and investing and anything related to personal finance should really be easier than ever. And that's because we have the luxury of having the internet and having the world's information at our fingertips. But it also means we have the whole world of misinformation at our fingertips as well. And it's up to us to understand what's what. And especially when it comes to topics that are part of the political narrative, like Social Security, because we know that everyone is totally calm and balanced about their political ideologies, right? And when you mix that with social media platforms that encourage content that gets more engagement and more clicks, it makes it even tougher. Which brings me to how Social Security is talked about online, with the best example being this tweet that was floating around Twitter or X a while back. And it says, by the time I'm 67, over $600,000 will be paid into Social Security on my behalf. And that money would have been worth $1.9 million if I had gotten a 5% return. My annual interest would be $95,000, while the government promises me $3,075 a month at 67, which is only $37,000 a year. How is that not theft? And look, on the surface, if you're just reading this and you don't understand how Social Security works, then yeah, you'll be like, wow, that's messed up. They're stealing from me. And then if you scroll down and start looking at the comments on some of these posts, it's even more misinformation. If a living wage is $15 an hour, why not make the minimum Social Security payment $2,400? Well, it's because we let the government hold it for us, and why should I give people a share of my Social Security check? So between the original tweet and then just these two comments, you have a bunch of wrong information. But let's start with the original. Now, first off, the money we pay into Social Security isn't actually on our behalf. That's the big misconception. Our Social Security taxes don't go into an account for us where the government invests it in all that. Our Social Security taxes go to pay out Social Security benefits for the current generation who's receiving them. Our dollars don't go to us at all. When we're ready to receive Social Security, the idea is that the workers of that day will pay their Social Security taxes that will go to us. And the fund that's depleting is what's used to make up the difference between the taxes collected and what's being paid out. And look, you don't need to trust me on this. We can do a simple Google search and go to the Social Security Administration website. And it tells us in plain terms. The current Social Security system works like this. When you work, you pay taxes into Social Security. We use the tax money to pay benefits to people who have already retired, people with qualifying disabilities, survivors of workers who have died, and dependents of beneficiaries. The money you pay in taxes isn't held in a personal account for you to use when you get benefits. We use your taxes to pay people who are getting benefits right now. Any unused money goes into the Social Security trust funds, not a personal account with your name on it. So, I mean, in 10 seconds, we were able to figure out what the actual truth was. And that's not to say that I think it's a good system, but it's the one we have to deal with. So understanding how it actually works is important. But now, does that mean that Social Security isn't theft? Well, that's going to be a personal perspective for each of us, because I understand when people think that taxes in general are a form of theft or that the money is not well spent by the government. But at least based on the original tweet, it's not theft in the way that he describes it, because again, your contributions were never meant to be your money. They're for the people who need it today. And this gets to the idea I wanted to talk about in terms of what we can and should do about it. Because the first thing we should be doing is taking accountability for our own learning. And there's nothing wrong with getting information online. I actually hope some of you get information from this channel even. But we should never trust our financial decisions only based on someone else's perspective. And so in the article, when some people say they're not planning to have Social Security available to them and they'll invest accordingly, I think that's actually the right approach. Not because Social Security is going to be totally gone, because we simply don't know what's going to happen. So you don't want to put your future or your family's future in the hands of someone else if you can help it. And I think that's just a basic truth for all of us about investing and why it's so important. The more we do it, the more we secure our financial future for ourselves, and the less dependent we have to be on anyone else. And people like to talk about financial independence, but sometimes I don't think they realize the key word in that phrase is independence. Just like when you say financial freedom, the operative word is freedom. And that doesn't mean that we get to do whatever we want. It actually means that we're taking the accountability and the responsibility for the outcomes. Because having the freedom to do things means having the freedom to do them wrong. So we have to make good decisions and choices, because the ability to make your own decisions is what freedom's all about. But it just feels like we rarely talk about that part of it. We just assume, well, if I was lucky like that person was and I had all this money, then I wouldn't be struggling. But I firmly believe that the information that any of us need to be able to change our situation is probably in our pocket or our hand right now, and that's our phone connected to the internet. So it's crazy to think how many people out there have this wrong idea of what Social Security even is and how it's supposed to work. And they're upset about it. They may be even voting a certain way about it. They may even be choosing their friends because of it, because the political discourse in America right now is just insane. And yet it's all based on incorrect information when the correct information is 10 seconds away. Now, multiply this by all the different personal finance and investing topics you know, and then multiply that by the resentment that builds up as people look at social media, comparing the unhappiness in their lives to the perceived happiness of others. And you can see why people might be upset or just assume that they have it harder than anyone else has ever had. But you guys know how I am about these things. I try to take a step back and look at the bigger picture, and I just think comparing different generations and what they had to go through just doesn't make a lot of sense. Because do you really think your grandparents had it easier than you did? They probably had what? The Great Depression, World War II, the Korean War. The stock market after the crash in 1929 didn't reach the same heights for another 30 years. Or what about your parents? Depending on how old they are, they probably had the Vietnam War, the Civil Rights Movement. the Cuban Missile Crisis, the Cold War, and between the 70s and the year 2000, mortgage rates hovered between 7 and 10%. And that's over a 30-year time period, and they even went higher than 15% at different points in time. So the point that I'm trying to make is everybody goes through stuff, and we all have to live through the period of history that we're born in, and that's just something we can't control. I mean, you might have people who watch this channel right now who live in other places outside of the U.S. who think all of us in the U.S. have it way easier in terms of being able to earn an income, right? Depending on where they're at in the world. So that's their situation that they have to overcome, while you have people here complaining that their situation's too hard. And ultimately, everyone's situation is going to be unique. And to me, acting like someone else had it easier than you is just one of those things where, one, it may or may not be true, and two, it doesn't actually matter at all. Because it's not something you have control over. It's not something you can change. And so every minute we spend worrying about it is a minute we're not spending improving our own situation. And it goes back to one of my strongest beliefs that I carry with me every day, which is none of us get to choose the hand we're dealt in life, but all of us are still responsible for our own outcomes. And for me personally, the sooner I embraced that idea, the better my life got. And the more focused I was on doing the best I could at the things that I could actually control and not focusing on the things that I couldn't. Now, if the idea of investing in general just kind of scares you, I broke down why it's important for every single one of us in this video right here. Hope you guys have a great day out there. Financial independence is true freedom, so keep building and stacking wins, and I'll see you on the next one. Peace.